Ladies and gentlemen, the time has come. We have ranked centermen, we've ranked defensemen, and now we get into my favorite ranking of the bunch, going through every single NHL starting goaltender and ranking them from worst to best. Because goaltenders are just so unpredictable, that makes ranking them even more fun, but we're going to be going through every single team here, so make sure you watch till the end to find out where your starting goaltender ends up, and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content just like this, and let's get right into it. Now, it was mentioned in the center and defenseman list, but when it comes to the criteria, I'm only taking into account the last 3 seasons of NHL hockey, putting a heavy emphasis on their performances in 2025. And when it comes to what I put importance in, consistency is the biggest thing for me. If you're a goaltender that can put out 3 back-to-back excellent years, you're gonna be a lot higher up in the rankings. For goaltenders that are all over the place and wildly inconsistent year to year, they're gonna be a lot lower. But let's start out in the number 32 position here, and in my opinion, the NHL's worst starting goaltender, and I feel bad because I actually like this player quite a bit, and that is Spencer Knight of the Chicago Blackhawks. It's not really his fault, but he just hasn't gotten much of an opportunity really to be a starting goaltender yet. But once he was traded from Florida to Chicago, he pretty much became Chicago's starter overnight, and I think it was deserved. He was pretty solid there, and even though the counting stats aren't amazing with an .896 save percentage, you gotta factor in the Chicago tax. But I thought he was really solid for Florida before that with a .907 save percentage. Unfortunately, he didn't play in the NHL in 2024, but that might be what's best for him. The jury's still out how much of a starter he can be for Chicago, but I think he could be a solid fringe guy at the very least, and he's already proven himself to be that type of player. Really, the only thing holding him back right now, again, is the lack of much experience, especially as a starter, which is hard to compare to a lot of the other guys on this list. Speaking of which, let's go on to number 31 and move on to the Philadelphia Flyers and their starting goaltender in Samuel Ersson. Now, he's still pretty young at 25 years old, but has a lot of experience already at that age. Back-to-back years of playing 45 plus NHL games, and I think looking he hasn't been able to have a great supporting cast around him. The wins department ain't too bad, but in terms of the actual play, he hasn't exactly been impressive by any means. He's tread water, but that's about it. On to number 30, we move on to Elvis Merzlikins, somebody that I love in terms of the personality, but in terms of the play, I've always been a bit iffy on, to say the least. He was somebody that burst onto the scene pretty well back in 2020, 2021, putting up some pretty good numbers in his first couple of seasons. In 2022, you started to see some of the cracks, but after that, it's just been horrible. And now that we're only taking into account the last 3 seasons, in the last 3 seasons, he hasn't put up a save percentage above .897. The only reason he's not last place, I would say, is just because Columbus's defense has not done him any favors whatsoever. Even this last season, when they were a playoff team, it was still a bit shaky. And I think getting an .897 save percentage last year, considering it was an okay year for him. So all things considered, not great, but I just kind of feel bad for him. On to number 29, we go on to a goaltender here that just cannot stay healthy or consistent to save his life, and that is Tristan Jarry of the Pittsburgh Penguins, who I think I've been pretty infamously against for a while now. Jarry has had his moments, but I just think has had a tough time acclimating as a true starter for the Penguins. He's had some good moments here or there. Again, I think 2022 with .919 save percentage, not too bad there. But since then, I just think it's been so shaky, so inconsistent. And even though Pittsburgh hasn't had the greatest team around him during that stretch, I think he's been a big reason why Pittsburgh has been really disappointing over these last 3 seasons, especially these last couple of years where it's just been rough to watch, especially this last season, an .893 save percentage in 36 games, the injuries, the lack of consistency game in, game out. He's just not a goaltender I tend to appreciate all that much. Nothing personal, but again, if I'm choosing a starting goaltender, Jarry is one of my last options just because of the complete lack of dependability. Now we start to get a little bit better here, and let's move on to the San Jose Sharks and their starting goaltender in Alex Nedeljkovic. Now I'm going to say this, you could put Yaroslav Askarov in this spot, and I could see why, but he's still Calder eligible, still somebody that's barely played up to this point, and it would be weird to rank him off of really a lack of NHL experience. In Nedeljkovic's case, though, he does have a pretty decent amount of games played the last few years. These last couple of seasons, back-to-back 38 games for the Pittsburgh Penguins, and I think he's done pretty decent considering it. I think he was overwhelmingly better than Jarry was through the course of the season for Pittsburgh. In San Jose, I think he could be fine, and nothing much more than that, which I think for San Jose is just exactly what they need. Just have somebody that can stopgap, play some games under Askarov, and I think that'll be perfect for him. Though again, because Askarov hasn't played that much, I'm not even sure where I'd put him on the list if he was there, maybe a spot lower, maybe a spot ahead. It's just a lack of experience that I think puts Nedeljkovic as the player I want to talk about more on this list. But don't get me wrong, I think Shesterkin will absolutely be on the list after this next season, and hopefully, with a great rookie season, pretty high too. On to number 27, and a goaltender I want to have so much higher, but I just can't justify it, and it is Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen of the Buffalo Sabres. And if we're talking about great stretches, great moments, Luukkonen would be among maybe the better goaltenders in the league. I think especially what you saw in 2024, getting a .910 save percentage at 2.57 goals against average, he was putting up stellar numbers. But you have 2023, which was a little bit lackluster, and this last season, which was just completely disappointing from him. An 887 save percentage, and even though, again, he had some decent stretches here and there, it didn't even compare to what he did the season before. I'm hoping for Buffalo's sake that he has a rebound season, or else, again, goaltending becomes a problem for this team. But again, I want to have him higher. It's just he's only really had one good season up to this point. On to number 26, and one of the most infamous goalies in the NHL, in Stuart Skinner of the Edmonton Oilers. Now, he's not the worst starting goaltender in the league, but I think in Skinner's case, the biggest thing that hurts him is, again, the consistency. You never know what version of Stuart Skinner you're going to get, and that's always incredibly scary. In terms of the counting stats, he's not been a horrible goaltender in his career. I mean, a .914 save percentage in 2023. This last year was a bit icky with an .896 save percentage, but again had a great playoff stretch out of nowhere, then ended up disappointing in the Stanley Cup final. This guy's just weird, man. But just know, whenever he plays the Dallas Stars in the playoffs, he's going to become prime Carey Price for some reason. The rest of it, it's a work in progress. On to number 25, we go into a goaltender that was just traded in this last offseason in John Gibson, now of the Detroit Red Wings. Now, this is somebody that actually hasn't really been much of a starter lately. He only played 29 games, but did look good in those games behind Dustin and Anaheim, getting a .912 save percentage and a 2.77 goals against average. Considering the team around him, not too bad there. The hope is that he's going to be able to transition that as a starter full-time for Detroit this next year, but it's a bit of a question mark. Just because, again, when you look at the games played that he's played with Anaheim, especially the last couple of seasons in 2023, 2024, when the stats weren't that great, that's when he was playing a big chunk of games. I mean, he had 53 games, an .899 save percentage. You're going to want better than that if you're Detroit, but the hope is that he can continue to improve and get back to that great starter level he was at in the late 2010s. On to the Carolina Hurricanes starting goaltender next up, and we go on to Pyotr Kochetkov, who is a pretty fascinating one because you could make the case that Freddie Anderson has been the #1 guy for Carolina, but in his case, he's played 47 games this last year in the regular season, an .898 save percentage, which is strange, but Carolina was just a strange team in the regular season this last year. I think he actually did quite well considering what was around him. It was just a weird start, especially for them, but I think he did okay. And then you have the year before that, getting a .911 save percentage and a pretty decent mark as a backup, .909 save percentage in 24 games the year before that. Not the greatest starting goaltender in the world, and again, this is a position that I think Carolina would stand to gain from him upgrading at some point, but still, I think Kochetkov is fine at this mark and is fine in this position. But now we take a big jump in terms of the quality of goaltenders. Next up, going on to the Utah Mammoth starter in Karel Vejmelka, who is somebody that has been another goaltender that's kind of been up and down in ways, but I do still come to appreciate. He's somebody that I liked quite a bit in 2023, getting a .900 save percentage on a pretty rough Coyotes team. Dipped out a little bit in terms of the play in 2024 as well as the games played, but I think rebound quite solidly for Utah this last year, getting a .904 save percentage in 58 games, getting a heavy workload, but looking pretty good with it. On to one of the weirder ones as well when it comes to the consistency in Jacob Markstrom of the New Jersey Devils. Somebody that I could see the argument for having quite a bit higher, I would say, but at the end of the day, Markstrom's another one of those goaltenders that I just don't know what you're really going to get out of him. Considering he was pretty average, I would say, in 2023. I think in 2024, he had a brilliant season for Calgary that got unnoticed considering how weird that team was around him. And for New Jersey this year, a team that was dealing with a ton of injuries, a ton of big issues, I think Markstrom was able to do a pretty solid job. Not overwhelmingly good, but I think he was decent, getting a .900 save percentage in 49 games. Again, I think in Markstrom's case, at this point now, I think he's just going to be a pretty average, pretty solid goaltender long-term for the next couple of seasons. Nothing, again, absolutely special, but I think Markstrom's consistency kind of leaves me wanting a bit more. Though still his best moments and the games he saves are pretty important. I think for New Jersey, still maybe you want a little bit more out of him. Now going on to maybe the most milquetoast starter in the league, I would say up to this point, in Adin Hill of the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, of course, taking the 3-year sample into account, we take in the 2023 Stanley Cup and his marvelous run there, and that's really been able to propel him to a bigger role. He had a 909 save percentage last year in 35 games, and this year was finally the true starter for Vegas, getting a 906 save percentage in 50 games. Again, looking solid, being what Vegas needed him to be. He's not going to blow you away by any means, but he's not getting paid that much either, and Vegas' systems around him have been perfect. That's kind of the biggest reason why I don't really have Aiden Hill that much higher, is that I think Vegas is doing him a lot of favors, but still, he's doing well considering the team around him and is doing exactly what he needs to do. But now we move on to the top 20 and a goaltender that, man, I just wish can stay healthy this next year, and that is Thatcher Demko of the Vancouver Canucks. If we're just taking them at their best, at their healthiest, then Demko would be a ton higher, like not even a conversation. But of course, the health just hasn't been there. When we take the 3-year sample into account, 2023 only played 32 games, looked fine. Then in 2024, looked a lot better, a 918 save percentage in 51 games, looked back to form. And then this year happened, only played 23 games and looked pretty brutal in those games too, getting an 889 save percentage. Looked a little bit better in the second half, I guess, but we're splitting hairs. Really, the fantastic 2024 is what keeps Demko this high, but again, I just want to have him have another fully healthy season. Get this man back to form because Vancouver badly needs it. On to another goaltender that I want to see get back to form here consistently, and Juuse Saros of the Nashville Predators, somebody that has really fallen for me over the last year, and it's mostly due because last couple of years for him haven't been at that stellar level that I've been expecting out of him. He was brilliant in 2023, getting a 919 save percentage after another couple of seasons before that, getting a 918 and a 927. He was becoming, in my opinion, one of the best goaltenders in the NHL, and one of the most consistent ones too. He had a stretch there where he wasn't below a 914 for multiple years, and that is extremely impressive. But you see the last couple of seasons, and it's just not been at a great level. Even when the Preds had that great 2024, it really wasn't because of Saros. He had so many stretches that were really ice cold, and then this year, I think he was at a pretty similar level, and Nashville just didn't have the team really to support him like they did the year before that, getting an 896 save percentage. And yes, the defense has its issues, but I think Saros is capable of so much more than he is right now, and I think we just haven't seen that level since 2023, which is a big reason why he is so low. But this is a goalie being paid $7.7 million. He was easily worth that contract when he was at his best, but it's up to him to get back to that level. On to number 18, we go on to another Central Division goaltender that is always around this spot for me, in Jordan Binnington of the St. Louis Blues. Now, he's a goaltender that in terms of the moxie and the swagger, is not somebody I love as a Dallas Stars fan, but in terms of Blues fans, they adore him for a very good reason. He's dependable in a lot of ways, and especially the last couple of seasons, I think he's played some really good hockey on top of being the antagonistic player that we all love and hate in a lot of ways. But I thought 2024 he was stellar, getting a 913 save percentage there. This last season, the counting stats weren't great, but St. Louis was also, again, a weird team around him. A 900 save percentage in 56 games, not horrible. And the goals against average wasn't too bad. The goals hit above expected wasn't too bad either. I think in Binnington's case, he's also a goaltender that, especially after his Stanley Cup run, we've always wanted a bit more than he's been, but I think that shouldn't hold his placement back, because the last couple of seasons, at least, he's been a very solid starter, but maybe not an elite one. Now, moving on to one of the more overlooked goaltenders in the NHL, I would say, in Anthony Stolarz of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, you could make the case that Wool is the starter, but I think Stolarz was able to take over the net in the playoffs. And I think in Stolar's case, he is somebody that has really been able to make a name for himself, and rightfully so, because I think especially the last 2 years he's played have been unbelievably good. You look at it, and in Florida, a 925 save percentage. I get it, it's Florida, but still, Bobrovsky wasn't putting up those type of numbers, I'll tell you that. And this last year, in his first season with the Leafs, got a 926 save percentage, a 2.14 goals against average. Really, the only thing holding him back is the games played department. Wool played quite a few more games, but I think Stolarz this next season is going to be the starter going in, just because of how consistent he has been and how good of a goaltender he has been across the board. Really, besides an 899 save percentage in Anaheim, which again isn't really much of an indictment against him, it's the Ducks defense. He had a 917 save percentage the year before that. He's largely been great across the games he's played over the stretch of multiple NHL seasons. Now he's starting to string it together with more responsibility, and that is going to be the biggest test for him. Can he play more than 40 games this next year, put up those similar type of numbers? That's what could maybe put him inside the top 15 for me. We go into a goaltender that I also have high hopes getting into the top 15 after next year in Lukas Dostal of the Anaheim Ducks. One of my faves. I have just adored watching him play over these last couple of seasons, and I would not look at the counting stats and get down on him whatsoever. You see a 903 save percentage this year, a 902 save percentage last year. Sure, it's not the best numbers in the world, but again, you gotta factor in Anaheim and how weird of a team they've been, especially this last year. Gibson put up some better numbers, but I think under Dostal, Anaheim was just not giving him the run support. They were just not playing well under him. It was a strange phenomenon to witness for me, but Dostal is somebody that is just so exciting, so electric, especially in those clutch moments, always seems to put up some big numbers and put up some big opportunities. I just think for the Ducks, he's kept them in so many games. He's been such a relentless warrior, especially for how young he is. The potential is just through the roof. Moving on to a goaltender here that hasn't really been able to showcase his talent until fairly recently, I would say, and that is Mackenzie Blackwood, now of the Colorado Avalanche. Now, he hasn't always been this good. In New Jersey, there's a reason why Devils fans were against him in a lot of ways. It was some rough moments here and there. But I think once he went to San Jose, he was really able to turn his career around. I mean, getting an 8.99 save percentage, I don't think people realize, on the 2024 Sharks is unbelievable. Not many goaltenders would be able to do that. And he also turned that into a 911 save percentage in 19 games for them this last year. Again, a team that was not good whatsoever. Goes on to Colorado, puts up some really good stretches, a little bit of inconsistency here and there, especially in the playoffs, but I think was really able to show what he was made of and show the potential of that. But again, I just want to see more consistency. I want to see him day after day, game after game, be the guy for the Avs, because I think in ways that was kind of in question with how well Scott Wedgwood was playing at the end of last season. So that will be kind of the step for Blackwood to take, but I think he has all the talent to do so. Now moving on to a goaltender here that is one of the youngest on the list, but has made such an impression already, and that is Dustin Wolf of the Calgary Flames. To be this high at 24 years old is spectacular. And again, like we talked about with like Lane Hudson in the defensive ranking, I take into account the last 3 seasons of NHL hockey. So a player only having 1 year is a bit of a situation that leaves them lower on the list than they maybe otherwise would be. If we're just taking into account this last season, Dustin Wolf will be maybe even top 5. I know it's crazy to say, but I think there's an argument for that. But taking the 3-year sample, even though he is lower, I think Dustin Wolf will absolutely be a top 10 goaltender here in a couple of seasons' time. I mean, you look at what he was able to accomplish with Calgary in his first season, being a really worthy Calder candidate, a 910 save percentage, a 2.64 goals against average on this last Calgary team, which again, the defensive structure was just not there. Dustin Wolf in so many ways was able to make that Calgary team not just competitive, but like a point from making the NHL playoffs this last year. That's how close they were, but I think 90% of the reason for that was because of this young man here. On to number 13, and I would say another pretty under-the-radar goaltender in terms of the starters around the league, and that is Joey Daccord of the Seattle Kraken. Somebody that I think pretty underratedly has been a back-to-back pretty great seasons for the Kraken. I get that it might not look like it, but back-to-back seasons playing 50-plus games for the Kraken. He got a 916 save percentage in 50 games last year. Stellar season, 15 goals saved above expected. This last year, though, even though the save percentage took a bit of a dip with a 906 in 57 games, he put up a 20 goals saved above expected. He was sensational for a Seattle team that just continued to get worse in so many ways, it felt. And it was brutal for him because he was putting up so many great games, keeping them so close in so many different matchups, but just didn't really have the results to show for it because Seattle was, I think, just letting him down. He's truly the lifeblood of that team, though, right now, and one of the few reasons why I don't think they'll be in the complete basement in 2026. Now on to number 12, we go into another American goaltender here, but somebody that I think has really lowered his stock in the last year, and that is Jeremy Swayman. Now I don't agree with him being outside of like top 20 lists or anything. I think that's a bit of recency bias, but I think in Swayman's case, he had a lot to prove this last year that he just simply didn't. But you look at the last 2 seasons before that, a 920 save percentage in 37 games, a 916 save percentage in 44 games as well in 2024. Great seasons back to back for him, especially in the playoffs where he got a 933 save percentage in 12 games in 2024. before. But this year, of course, with the contract negotiations, heading into training camp, he wasn't ready for the season, and mentally, that can take quite a toll on a goaltender, and it pretty obviously did. An .892 save percentage, just a horrible, no good year from Swayman in any way. But I'm willing to cut him a bit of slack because of the contract situation, because of how he entered the NHL season. It's not a great spot for any player, let alone a goaltender especially, to head into. So I pity him in that way, but it's put up for shut-up time in 2026 because he really needs to rebound for Boston to have a chance at the playoffs. On to number 11, a Swedish goaltender here that was once a former teammate of Jeremy Swayman, and Linus Ullmark of the Ottawa Senators. Now, Ullmark is a fascinating case because even though I think his year in Ottawa is maybe his worst season out of the last three, it was still really solid and exactly what Ottawa needed to make the NHL playoffs this last year. Before that, of course, you have a .915 save percentage in 40 games and a .938 save percentage in 2023, one of the best goaltending seasons we've seen recently. Of course, not counting the NHL playoffs. That's maybe the most disappointing part about Ullmark is that the playoffs over the last three seasons have not been exceptional by any means, or even fine. They've been pretty below average, but still, I think what Ullmark has been able to accomplish in Boston and now for the Ottawa Senators, being that full-time starter has been especially important, just maybe not top 10 material for me yet. Now on to another Swedish goaltender here to start out the top 10. Let's go on to Filip Gustavsson of the Minnesota Wild. Now it's a shame because if Gustavsson just had a decent 2024, he'd probably be inside the top 8, but that just wasn't really the case. He had a great 2023, really bursting onto the scene, getting a .931 save percentage in 39 games, though not the true official starter yet. He did play starter minutes and starter games, but wasn't really at that level yet. And then we saw this last season, getting a big jump in the games play department, 58 games, and looking very solid. A .914 save percentage, maybe not at the level that he was at in 2023, but considering the workload, I think it looks pretty good. I like Gustavsson a lot though, and even though 2024 was a bit of a misstep, I would say, he's trending in the right direction, and still at 27 years old, pretty young considering the starting goaltenders on the list. Moving on to a much older goaltender, though, on the list here, let's move on to Darcy Kuemper of the LA Kings. And I gotta say this, if you told me after last year that he would end himself inside the top 10 to end 2025, wouldn't have expected that at all. But Darcy Kuemper was able to truly show himself off well. In Washington, in his first season, a pretty decent .909 save percentage, though, didn't blow the roof off of anything. And then we saw in 2024, just a brutal year out of him, an .890 save percentage in 33 games, just not what he needed to be. Then he gets shipped off to LA in the big Pierre-Luc Dubois deal, and look what he did, man. A 2.02 goal against average, a .922 save percentage in 50 games. The goals they'd have expected, among the best in the league. Kuemper had one of his best seasons, if not his best season ever at 35 years old. And yes, 2024 wasn't that great. Welcome to the Filip Gustavsson camp, but Kuemper showed off so well this last season that it almost doesn't matter now. For the LA Kings especially, Kuemper is here to stay as the starter, and especially if we take into account this last season was one of the best goaltenders in the league. Now, we move on to another Canadian goaltender here, and I would say arguably the most underrated one in the league here in Sam Montembeault of the Montreal Canadiens. And I don't think a lot of people would have him top 10, but I think it would be a mistake not to. I think there's been a lot of overlooking Montembeault because of the counting stats, but as we talked about with guys like Dustin Wolf and Lucas Dostal, it's just not good to look at just save percentage and goals against average when you're looking at a starting goaltender on a rebuilding team. And Montreal has been exactly that, especially defensively. They have not been a good team at all. So the fact that he's been able to put up .901 save percentage, .903 save percentage, .902 save percentage this last year in 62 games is extremely impressive to me. But it's not just that when it comes to Montembeault, it's the X factor that he has. He is just so good at keeping his team in games, stealing games. I mean, especially in 2023, 2024, there were so many opportunities where the Habs should have lost these games by a landslide. But Montembeault was somehow able to make 45 saves and keep them in it. It's just so much competitiveness in his game, so much relentlessness. He just will not back down. And I love that out of a goaltender. Montembeault is somebody that I think is just a core piece of this Habs team, though, that again, I mean, kind of goes overlooked because he's not putting up the .920 save percentages, but look at the defense around him. How is that even possible for him to do? Put Mike Matheson, if you wanna, on the Connor Hellebuck Winnipeg Jets, and I'm sure Hellebuck's save percentage would dip just a little bit. Moving on to number 7, and we go on to another Canadian goaltender here in Logan Thompson of the Washington Capitals. Somebody that if we're talking about fiery, relentless spirits, Logan Thompson is right up there. You look at the last 3 seasons, a couple of very solid seasons for Vegas, a 908 and 915, but then this last year, even though the counting stats aren't unbelievable, a 910 save percentage in 43 games. You look at the wins department, 31, 6, and 6, a 917 save percentage in the playoffs as well in 10 games. Logan Thompson was exactly what this Caps team needed. And I think being energized as that starter, being the number 1 guy there for the Caps, really has allowed Thompson's game to flourish. But now going on to the player just outside the top 5, let's go on to Jake Oettinger of my Dallas Stars. And he is still one of the better goaltenders in the NHL, but I just have so many problems with him in the playoffs, man, that I just can't put him quite yet inside the top 5. Plus, in terms of what he's actually done in Dallas, I think he's had some decent seasons, but nothing that's been absolutely exceptional yet. I thought 2023 was great, but again, the playoffs were a bit of a disappointment. So I think stringing that all together is kind of just the missing piece for Oettinger. In terms of talent and in terms of the best stretches, again, he is one of the best out there. But I just want to see a fully healthy, fully complete season where he's great in the regular season and great in the playoffs. Is that so much for me to ask? But inside the top 5, let's go on to the string of Russian goaltenders here and move on to Ilya Sorokin of the New York Islanders. And I will say this, in terms of Sorokin's best, we haven't quite seen that since 2023, but I still think Sorokin's one of the best out there, and considering the weapons he's had to work with for the Islanders, yeah, I'd be pretty negative too if I were him. You look at the last 2 seasons, and again, it's not spectacular in terms of the counting stats, 907 save percentage and 909 save percentage, but I think this last year, we saw him play really well. He just wasn't rewarded because, again, he's playing on the New York Islanders. And I'll say this too, even at times, if Sorokin feels a little bit checked out, it's still impressive how well he's been able to do that considering the circumstances. And I think once the Islanders do get a bit better, we'll see Sorokin hopefully rebound in a major way and get back to those legendary numbers we were starting to see at the beginning of his career. Moving on to number 4, and we go on to back-to-back Stanley Cup champ in Sergei Bobrovsky of the Florida Panthers. And this is a tough one because in terms of Bobrovsky's regular season play, it's not really been fantastic. I mean, he had a 915 save percentage in 2024, very solid there, but 2023 was pretty average, I would say, from him. 2025, it was okay in the regular season. But of course, when we're talking about Bobrovsky, we're talking about the playoffs and just how much he's been able to be clutch in the right moments for Florida to be able to get them into great positions. Back-to-back Stanley Cup finalists, and of course, back-to-back Stanley Cup champions. He was especially brilliant, I thought, during this 2025 run, where he had a 914 save percentage in 23 games. Just stellar performances whenever Florida needed him. But I do think the regular season holds him back a bit, and I do think in terms of the consistency, it hasn't quite been there. But of course, when the going gets tough in the playoffs, Bobrovsky is going to come up and show up, and that's why he's so high up on the list. On to number 3, we move on to yet another Russian goaltender here in Igor Shesterkin of the New York Rangers. And even though he might not have had the highs of a Bobrovsky over the last 3 seasons, I think this is a player that has been victimized the most by the Rangers being just so inept around him. I mean, Adam Fox could also have a stake to that claim, but Shesterkin has just not been given a good ride over the last few seasons. I thought he was pretty solid in 2023, had his rough moments in 2024, but I think this last year we saw some good stretches that got him back to a good level, even if the save percentage weren't at the greatest level because the Rangers, again, were just a dumpster fire around him. I honestly feel bad because Shesterkin should be putting up some great numbers, and sure, he hasn't been up to the Vezina trophy year kind of levels over the last 3 seasons, but I still think he's been among the best out there. And again, if he had just a slightly better defense around him, something that was actually capable around him, we wouldn't really be having much doubt and much conversations around him. Just because we've seen some pretty icky stretches over the last couple of seasons specifically, that's one of the bigger reasons why he's outside the top 2, but I think in terms of pure talent alone, he could absolutely be a number 1 goaltender. I think has been in the past. On to number 2, though, we go on to the Tampa Bay Lightning's Andrei Vasilevskiy, who always just seems to put up consistent numbers year after year. And it's interesting because I think Vasilevskiy's case, 2024 was a bit of an average season for his standards, but I think 2023 was brilliant, and especially this last season, he was undeniable. A 921 save percentage in 63 games, just a dominant season out of him, and I would say one of his best, considering Tampa's defense also not being the greatest in the world. Vasilevskiy being able to do what he did last year was sensational. Though I will say this, over the last 3 seasons, the playoffs haven't exactly gone his way. His best being an 897 save percentage in 5 games last season in 2024, but all 3 seasons have been below 900 save percentage. So this next season, to get back in a better spot in the playoffs, has to be the number one priority for it. Speaking of goaltenders that need to find themselves in the playoffs here, let's go on to my number one starting goaltender in the NHL in Connor Hellebuyck. And I think it's a great example of just how insane Hellebuyck has been in the regular season, that he's still number one despite all these struggles and weird inconsistencies in the playoffs, because that has been the conversation around him, especially over the last 3 seasons. You look at it at 886 save percentage, 870, and 866 save percentage, just horrible, considering the circumstances around him, considering how good Winnipeg has played around him too. It's disappointing to say the least, especially for how pretty decent he was in the 4 playoffs before that. The playoff before this, the bad stretch, he got a 931 save percentage in 8 games back in 2021. Really good numbers there. But it just shows how unbelievable Hellebuyck has been in the regular season, that he's still at this number one spot for me. And I think in terms of talent, in terms of consistency, is still the number one guy for me. 920 save percentage, 921, 925. No goaltender regular season wise has even been close in terms of the consistency that Hellebuyck has put out there. And if he was just a bit better in the playoffs, man, it would be undeniably number one for me. I could get it if you're, again, trying to judge more off clutch gene. Maybe you'd have a Bobrovsky higher up on the list, I guess. Maybe he'd be number one. But I just think in terms of who I would still take, it would still be Connor Hellebuyck as the number one guy there. And a big reason why Winnipeg has been such a consistent and successful team recently. And I get it, the playoffs leave a bad stain in your mouth, but when we're taking the full body of work into account, and most of the games being in the regular season, Hellebuyck has just been so dominant that it's hard to put him anywhere else but this number one spot. But that is it for my starting goaltender rankings for 2025. Hopefully you guys enjoyed as much as I enjoyed making it. If you guys did, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell if you haven't already. And comment down below your thoughts on my rankings. What do you agree, what do you disagree with, and where would you put your starting goaltender on this list? Of course, you know, all the hockey fans you guys know online. And I will see you guys in the next one. Have a fantastic hockey day, and goodbye.